Hi, I'll be live. Hi everyone. Hi everybody. Welcome to Launchpad, an initiative by Newton School, in which you learn about courses that make you industry ready for free. Okay. This is a course on React, introduction to React, with basics and some small projects. Okay. In the past lecture, we have learned about React components, React state, React props. We also learned about something called as component lifecycle in React, and how that affects our component, how those things work out. We also learned about functional component and how should be used and where we can use them. And we also learned how to use component things like component did not and those things in React functional component to have a stateful or a bit intelligent component by using some kind of hooks. We discussed about use state hook, use effect hook, and how they work and what functionality they allow us to do. And in the last lecture, we built a very simple app for a game we have, tic-tac-toe. So in that, we learned how to divide the component, and so that it makes better sense to it makes better sense to actually make the code readable and maintainable in the long term. And We have seen yesterday I've used this something called as class names here to give CSS styles. You must be wondering how the CSS style is getting applied and how to actually style our component or that. So to style a React component, there are multiple ways. So we're going to discuss some of them in this one. Okay. So basically, if you have ever written an HTML, so to make that HTML look good to the end user, you have to use something called as CSS or cascading style sheets. Basically, there's something like this. There's something called as rules, which describe what things to be done, like background border, font size, or font weight, or line height, yeah, and then we can have margin padding, all sort of things. Okay, so basically this is CSS we have. Okay, now in a React component we have multiple ways to do this. Okay, so starting with the simplest one and the most that does not require any setup. Like basically, if you use create React app, you will directly get you can directly use that. Okay, so that is called as style. So basically, every React component, like every inbuilt React component, will have a prop called as style. Okay, so there is always going to be a prop called style. For just now, I'm just going to remove this thing. So that we can see. So this style will take, you can pass the object that you have. Okay, so let's just go in app CSS. We have a square class here. Okay, now inside whatever this square class that you have, this can be considered as a JavaScript object, and you just copy it. And let's say we make it const style, and then we just styles. Basically, what we have to do is just make them as a comma separated, and just make everything as a string also. So because JavaScript does not know these properties as a variable, so what we have to do is we have to make them string and just So we have to just transform this into a JavaScript object so that it just becomes a JavaScript object instead of being a that thing. Like basically, instead of being a CSS, we have to just convert it into a JavaScript object, and that's what we are doing here. And just okay. Now we can just put this thing as in like this since it's inside. Okay, just in here. We're going to just put okay, and then we just side. Okay, so to make sure this thing works, let's save it and start our server. So basically what I did here is whatever the style we were having there, I just took that from the converted it into a JavaScript object and given it as a style. So like what style prop is basically whatever you wanted it to, whatever you wanted to show when using the class as a style sheet, like whatever the style you wanted to show in the CSS, you just put it as a style prop, and that will be applied to that element. Okay, so if you can see, if I just remove for now, just remove this thing for now, we can see that the style will be removed. Okay, we can see this style is removed. Yeah. Now, if we just put it back, we can see that this style is just back. So what it does is it basically applies all these styles to whichever element you have put it. Okay. Now, this is one way of putting this, and then is this like if you don't want to make just another variable, if you just have like something like font size. Font size is just say 24 or 36 pixel. So we can just make it this way and just save it, and then we can see it just gets applied that way also. So you can see the only the font size thing is applied, nothing else is applied because I have not specified anything here. So you can apply it this way also, like styling. And basically, when you apply it this way, so you have to use camel case thing because it does not support directly like hyphen ones. So what you have to do, either make them as string. So like if you want to use hyphen ones, you can just do that and just make it as a string. So it is not a problem. You can do that, or you can whenever like you have this font weight. So you, instead of using like font hyphen weight, you can use directly is font weight. So wherever you have a hyphen in your sorry, in a CSS property, you just replace it the hyphen with a capital word next word, and then you can use it as same. Okay. So internally, what it will do, it will just change that thing to same. Okay. That is basically what it will do internally. There is no difference. Just to save you like writing every time, you do not have to write every time this in the brackets. So if I just to show you how to do it, we can just make it style and just remove these, and we can have font size like this, font width like this, line height like this, and the margin right we can do this thing. Basically, that way we could have. Okay. So if it is a single word, there is no problem. If it is like hyphenated property of CSS, then you have to convert it into camel case to directly use it as, so that you do not have to define it as a string. Otherwise, you have to use it with a string. So like as we used previously. So let's just save it and see if this makes anything different as we did previously. You can see it is same as in the previous one. Okay. Uh, so this is something called as inline style. Inline style. Why it is called inline style? Because we are using either inside the tag that we have, we are directly defining inside the style property, or we are defining in style object, and then we are defining directly inside that style property. Okay. Now, just suppose we are in this board one. Okay, and for each of these row, these status, this board row, suppose we are using style, that's the inline style that we have just seen, and we create an object or we directly put it here. So just to like show you that how cumbersome would it look, just take the style from here. Uh, okay, so just to make sure that you understand why we do not want to use this or why we need to minimize this. So basically, just if I look at it and just put this thing here. Okay. Now this is a this still very simple component, but still you can see that this makes it look very cumbersome. Like if somebody who is not very versed with your component or very versed with your code, he will be getting confused if the component is big enough. Like if your component is like around 100 200 lines, and the style property also added that, then it will be cumbersome to actually understand what is happening and what style is getting applied in when. Okay. So what another approach there is, and that is called as specifying the class name. So if you remember from yesterday, we use class name. Why we use class name? So in HTML, we can always use class and then give it a class. Okay. Now, but since we are inside JavaScript, and class is a reserved keyword, because we can obviously define class using a class keyword in JavaScript. So to avoid the conflict, we have a prop called as class name. So every predefined tag, like every HTML tag that you've ever seen, or any like tag that is that comes with predefined React, so that will always have a class name prop. And inside your component, you can also build your class name prop. Like if you want a class name prop to be passed to your component, you can build it, and you can use that. But if we are talking about like something like div or a span or a tag or a h1 tag, you will always have a class name. Okay. Now, how this works. Okay. So let's just to see how this works is basically inside the app.css we have imported a file called sorry, inside app.js we have imported a file called app.css. Okay. Now app.css contains some styles. Yeah. These style is basically some class names and then the CSS properties. So basically, whatever you written in when you were using a simple HTML CSS website, you'll write it same. So like dot represent that is it is a class name, and if the class name is square, apply that. Yeah, these property to that. Now it's same as that. You apply this property. You make this property same the way you were doing before. Now what happens is when you use this kind of styling method, this is called just using a simple style sheet method or a normal CSS method. Okay. uh, so whenever you're using this, once you have imported a file like this thing app.css, it when it gets compiled, you just get a one big bundle of CSS, just one big bundle of CSS, which contain every style sheet that you have used in your React project. Okay. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages of that. Now, advantages is as you can see, I've only imported app.css in this, and I've not imported anything anywhere else. Like you can see, I've not imported any CSS file in Board or in Square. Yeah, but still I can access them. Now, I can access them the way, because when it gets compiled, it just makes one big chunk of CSS which contains every file, every class that you have made inside your project. Okay. Now, this is an advantage that you don't have to import a CSS file in every component that you define. If some component already have imported that, you just need to put the class name wherever you want to use it, and that will affect your component also. Now, with the same point, if you look at it, suppose you have a component called game here. Okay. Game. Now, what you have done is, instead of app.css, you created another like CSS file, new file. Let's say board.css. Okay, and board.css contains same things that game. Let's just say game info, and board.css have this, and board.css is imported in board.jsx. Okay. Now, inside board.css, we have put margin left this, and let's say we put margin top to be 200 pixels. Okay. Now, what would happen is, what happened is, the app inside the app.css, this game info file will get also this game info class will get overridden by the class we have defined in board.css when it gets compiled. So that is a problem we have. Okay. So if we go over there, oh sorry. Now you can see, previously what we have in app.css, just the margin left of 20 pixel. Yeah. So it just needs to be shifted 20 pixel to the from the left border of our screen. But inside board.css, what we have did, we also added a margin top of 200 pixel. Yeah. Now what is happening? It is now also shifting down 200 pixels. So what happened uh, is that the previous style got overridden by this. Yeah. Now, this is a problem. Suppose you have multiple components, and some component needs some margin type, and some component need some margin, but they need to use the same class. So what the designer did, or what the developer did, is just took your class and made a CSS file and just made changes that he wanted to make. Now those changes are well and good for him, but those changes are not well and good for already defined component or the component that you define. Yeah. So what will happen? The design will look different, and that will make this will be very painful to see, until unless somebody does a manual testing and figure out. Then we have to figure out from where it changed, because we have so many component use that. So we need to figure out from where this class was overridden. Yeah, that is a painful process sometimes. Yeah. So this is the only disadvantage of using this way, that your classes can get overridden if somebody else, without using some kind of other CSS tricks, like assigning a parent element here, like say you must have a board class, then only apply this game info class, otherwise apply this game info class. Yeah. So if the person did not do this, so like now it is not changing because there is no board class here. There is no board class in app.js. There is no board class here also. There is a board row but not board. So it will not change, because until unless it gets a board parent, then the game info, then only it is going to change. Yeah. So this is one disadvantage. You can fix it like this, but when the components, when you have multiple components, and so if your project is like any normal project that is used in industry, your project will grow so much that it will be very hard to do it this way. Yeah. So then something called as there's something called as module is used. Yeah. So what happens is with the modules is, whenever you want to use a module, what you will do is, instead of using just directly app.css, what you will do is rename this file and make it module.css. Okay. What? So this is still a CSS file, but when you import it in the app.css, you cannot directly import it this way. You have to do it this way, and you just import it like style from this. Now what this will do is, for every class, the classes that you have in app.module.css, these classes, the board class and the status class, the square class, for each of these classes, what you can have is, whenever you want to apply this property now, so what you have to do, instead of using directly this, what you're going to do is style dot, it was game class, we're going to use game, style dot game hyphen for underscore. So just make it game underscore info, which is to be a bit better. Game underscore info class. Now what you will see is, whenever we import this, it like this. This is only applied to the current component that it is imported in. Its style will not propagate to other components. Let's see how it works. Just to make sure. Board.css. If we go here and look at our element, now you can see that whenever you use the module portion, what you're going to get is this thing. You can see inside this, where is the app? Yeah, inside this we use style.game. Okay, this was a class name. Class name was game class. Now, but when you look at the actual HTML that is rendered, what you will see is the class name would be like some your component, then the class actual, then there is a random string, whatever it is. It will be random every time. So what this makes sure is, any changes to any other component did to the same class will not get reflected in this component. So what it makes it, it makes it the file to be contained. So like the CSS to be contained inside this. So it makes it local to that component, instead of like anybody can change the class and then. But still, what you see is you can still access, like whenever you're using this. This also makes one giant that thing. What we say, one giant CSS, but since the importing method is different now, what happen is style.game will make this when it gets compiled. So this will make the class name to be a bit like obscure, or like a change for this component local, for this component only. Okay. Now, yeah, as you can see, inside the board class, we can still access status, board row, and everything else. And inside that, we can also see that we have access to that. So just to have it here, let's just say import style from dot slash app dot module dot Okay. Now wherever we use class, we're going to replace this style dot status style dot code underscore. I'm just changing this here. And just going to okay. So this has changed our style for this component also. Let's see in the code what happens. You can see for every class that we have changed using style, the class name is now changed. Now class name is board row, but it also have app, then board row, and then some something is different string. Okay, so that makes a style to be local for that component only instead of using some other component. Instead of affecting some other component, just affecting our component only. So that is what we have a module css that we called it. Now there are other ways to do that, and something called as jss, in which you need a package called react jss, which allows you to write like inject css as like. So basically what happens is you can, whatever you're writing in this thing, you can write into javascript and then use that package to inject that into your code. So that requires a dependency. So that is one other thing that we can look at. Something There is one more thing called a styled component. Now what styled components are, basically styled components are also somewhat similar to what we are using right now. So basically what we do is instead of doing that, what you're going to do is importing from a package called a styled component. Okay, so what that is, styled comma, that is css. Just need to see. Okay, this is not stalled. We have to look at, we have to install it, and let's just see if npm package is same as that. Style. Okay. So what basically would happen is you will make something like this. So let's say inside render, we wanted our div to have a style called game. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a div const div, something like this, and then from styled, then inside the styled, that what we can do is style.div. Now style.div is basically the element that we have wanted to style it. Okay, now how do we style it? We make a backtick and then write whatever css we wanted to write. Yeah, so let's say we want the game one, so we're going to just take this and yeah, basically, and then what we're going to do, instead of using this component, this div, what we're going to do is we're going to use this div. Okay, and just changing this to, yeah. Now if we run it, we're going to get what we need, like the way it should have been rendered before. Okay, should be fine right now. So basically this is how like style component, but what you do is you style component. Let's just install it. Let's just restart it. So what will happen is, instead of like using the normal div, you use the style div. So what are the advantages of it? So like basically what you can do is you can create like just whatever the way whatever like normal components that you wanted to have, and just then use those components instead of using a default div. Yeah, basically that is the advantage. And so you do not have to define like if you're using a text box or a button, so you just define one time what the button should look like, and then you can use that as a component instead of defining every time the style whatever the button should have. Okay. uh, what's happening with this style component? Not that. How could this be possible? Okay, it has to be components. Just install it. Different. This has to be style. So basically, that was about the way we can style in a different ways. We can style a React component. Okay, and now one more thing I need. We will talk about this lecture: how to debug a React application. Okay, so just a minute, like let it finish so that we can see how can we debug an application in React. Okay, still not finding style. Okay, this might be the package issue. So I might be misremembering what the package npm code will be. You can look at that at npm, and then you will be able to find. So this is how it will work basically. So just going to be this. Okay, now we're going to look how can we debug our React application. Okay. Now, to debug a React application, we have something. React developers have made us something called as an extension that we have, and then you can React dev tools that we call. Okay, so you can download it for Chrome, and you can have it for Mozilla also. Whatever you wanted to have for. So, like for Mozilla, you can have React developer tools the same, and for Chrome also there is like on the Chrome store you can also have that. Okay, so after installing this, so whenever you are using a React app, like any website, like even if you're using a live website, let's just go to Instagram for now, and now, since Instagram is built in React, and so what we can always see is this component will show us what the component structure is, what is going inside our DOM structure. Okay, you can see that. And there is also one thing: whenever you have a website that is using React from in Mozilla, you can look from here, and this will say this page is using what type of build it is using, and if it is React, then it will tell you what type of build it is using. If it's not React, then it will say the website does not use React, is not built in React. Okay, so for our website, if we look into it, React Dev Tools, so it will say this is a development build because we have not used a production build, we are using a development build. Okay, and we could use component and profiler to check our component structure, or to profile our the component. Now, what this component does is component will show you whatever your component structure is. Now our component structure is basically pretty simple, but think about it. If your component structure is very complex, then what it will show you is basically when you click on the component, it will show you whatever the props there are, whatever the state there is. Okay, so let's just go on the board component. We can see currently we have no props passed to the board component. Okay, but there are state is player X that will store which player's choice, which player's turn it is, and then we have a squares value. Okay, now whenever you change anything here from the UI, you can see those changes were reflected here. So you can see in real time what is happening inside your component. Okay, so let's just click on this one, and you can see this has changed to X. Okay, now if it adds some props, like suppose this one. Okay, so this is a fourth square. Currently we have prop null, and then we also pass a function called onClick. So if you go into the code, and from the board, we can see we have passed the prop called onClick, and we have passed the prop called value. Okay, so we can see those things basically from here also. So when I click like on this one, you can see the prop has changed, but the function has not changed. The prop has changed because only the props value we have changed. When we click, only the props value changed. The value prop changed, nothing else changed. So what is the use of this? Just suppose you were having a bug. Okay, so what was happening in this bug is, let's say we are showing this. Let's just save this. And what we are showing is currently the next player is O. But what we were intended to do was that if current player needs to be X first. Okay. So what we did, what happened was this condition was wrong. Okay. Or somebody who's writing the code does not understand what this is player X needs to be. Okay, he might have first defined it true and thought that it would define player X's turn, but he forgot in time, and he just wrote a reverse condition. Okay, now you are tasked to debug it. How will you know which one is true or not? Okay, so what basically you can do, this is very simple, so you can just directly see this. This is player X needs to be true, and he has done something there. But if it's a complex component, then you cannot see that. Okay, directly. So what basically you will do is you will look, you will do the steps to reproduce the bug, and you will also at the same time will continue to look at what the props are, what the state is doing, and try to debug what condition he got wrong. Okay, so in this case, if we look at this, this X is getting clicked, but it is saying first time X was going to click, so this was right, but our status is still wrong. Now it is saying next that player's turn is the X players has that next turn, but that is not true. When you click, it is going to show O, and that's showing reverse. Now you can see from here what condition he's got now is for the status, when it is true, he's displaying O instead of X. So what he should have done is, instead of doing this, it should have done this, and the bug is fixed. Now you are saying the exactly correct thing. Yeah. So this is very useful extension. So if you're ever building a React app, you should have this. And this is a good extension to have. It allows, instead, otherwise, if it is not there, what you have to do is you have to put console log where you think that this thing can be there, or where you think that this thing can be changed. So you have to put console log. Now that is also a way, obviously, but it is a very cumbersome way to do that. Yeah. So this is what we have, how to debug our React component. Okay. Now, this is profiler. What this profiler does is basically tracks when you hit the record button and you just go through the component by using clicks and other things. What it will do, it will just see which component is rendered or multiple time re-rendered, and how much time it took to render, and how much time it took to re-render, and sort of those like. So it's like basically it's a graph like thing where you can see which component is taking most time to load on the page. Okay. So that is about how we can debug our basically the let's say basically whatever the code we have, or just check for performance issues also. Okay, so these two extensions. So like when you install React developer tools, these two extensions, these two things are always going to be there. Yeah. Now, one more thing we need to know about is how do we call an API in the React? Okay. Now, if you know JavaScript, then you must be knowing that we can use fetch API, to use that, or you can use Axios. Okay. And now, one thing need to understand is when to call an API. Okay. Because you cannot directly call that API and render and then expect that API to like be populating data here. Okay, that will be just a bit non-React way, and that is not a good thing to do. Okay, so what we should always call APIs when if it is a API that requires data, we should not actually make the component wait to render something. We should show something to the user, but we should manage the state of the component in a way that when the user when by the time the API gives you the result, you at least have something to be shown to the user instead of waiting for like the API call to return. So what I mean by that is, just suppose we have this thing, and just going to uh, so what I mean is, if you have a component, if you want an API that needs to be displayed on the mounting of the component. Okay, so what you can do is you can just define a state and have a variable called loading that is true initially, just for because initially you want the data to be there. Okay, so you make it true, and you make it also a data variable, and that maybe just suppose that is an array. Okay, now what you will do is inside the component did mount, what you have to do is axios.get. So this is an Axios package, which so if you know about JavaScript, you must be knowing about that. Or if you don't know, you can go and look at the documentation of it. So basically, what you're going to do is you're going to give a URL. So just to get a URL, we could use this URL. This is a public API which returns an array of ports. Okay, so it's an array of objects, and each object is a text and an who written it. Okay, and the author. Okay, now that it is a promise, it returns a promise. Now, if you want, you can make this an await and just apply async here. But what it will do is it will just make the component wait here. Okay, and that is not a very good thing when building a front end, because you don't want the user to wait for anything. Okay, you want it like to show the user like that it is if the data is coming, that like anything should be displayed on the page should be there instead of like waiting for the API to come. Okay, now what we'll be having is the response, and in that response, what we can do is, now we have received a response. Now what the response is, this response is basically whatever the API was about to return, it has done it. Okay, now what you have to do is you want now the loading to be finished. Now loading is finished, so what you're going to do is make loading false, and you also make data to be response.data. Okay, now this response.data, why? Because when Axios return a response, and then always it has like a data property. Okay, so in that you have the data. Okay, now we also need to add a catch so that just if anything fails, and we can just for now make a console log add. Okay, now we have made this loading true. Now we at least have to show this loading actually. Okay, so what we're going to do is if there is loading, loading is coming from state. If this dot state dot loading is there, just loading, then we might want to like return something. Let's say just we are returning div, and that is having just a text called loading, and that is in h1. Okay, now if it is not loading, now what we want, if it is not loading, otherwise what we want to return is just basically, let's say return uh, data.map, and it's just going to render whatever the data we are having. And we're going to do is a return d.text by d.author. Okay, now this is just going to be now you can see is if I just refresh it for a brief second visual loading. So at least user know that something is loading. Instead of seeing a blank screen, user will know that something is loading. And as the loading finishes, you render whatever you wanted to render on the screen, or whatever the API going to return, and whatever processing you wanted it to do. Okay, so that is going to be how we can handle our API calls. Okay, so basically in this lecture what we have learned how we can style our React components, and how we can what are the different ways that we can style, what are the pros and cons of different ways, and how we can debug our React application using the React dev tools. And we also learned like how we can handle like handle basic API calls. So like API calls always can be complex. Like you're not always going to do a post call or a send call like on did mount. You're always going to do when some event happens. So you can do that, but general idea is the same. You somehow let the user know that you are loading. So if you remember, if you've used Google Docs, okay. So if you must have seen that it saves your document automatically, and whenever it saves or whenever it is not able to save, it just displays your message on the top that it is not able to save, or it has saved up till this point, and after that it is not saved yet. Okay, so this is the general way we handle the API always, because we always want the user to know that that your work or whatever you're doing is loading or either saved, and we also want them to know that if error have occurred, then what that there is some error. Please refresh the page or whatever. Okay, so that's how we can handle the API calls also. So this was it for this lecture. In the next lecture, that's going to be the last lecture for this course, and we're going to build a to-do app, and so that we can learn how we handle form in React, and how we can just make a simple like application that is that have a bit more interaction from the UI. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. Thanks for your time.